Come on. Welcome everyone to the OTS webinar about career discussion with Annemieke Aertsma-Roos and Shalini Anderson. Annemieke joins us from the University of Leiden Medical Center, and Shalini is from AstraZeneca. So that we firstly introduce themselves a little bit, and then we've got some pre-asked questions. If you also have questions, you can put them into the chat box. I'll post the list and you can upvote questions that you really find important. I'll copy it into the chat box. And we'll do that while Annemieke and Shalini introduce themselves. Over to you.
Okay, so Shalini, who goes first?
You do.
I do go first.
Academia is first.
Okay. So I'll just briefly introduce my career so far. And I will not go into too much detail, but I will outline some, say, key points where I made strategic decisions or in hindsight, made a strategic decision without realizing it. So I knew that I wanted to be a scientist from when I was quite young. So already as a teenager, I knew that I wanted to develop medicine. So my father is a clinician, and I could see that lots of times he had nothing. He had to tell his patients that there was no medicine. So I thought, okay, there's plenty of doctors. I like the medical field. Didn't really feel like being a doctor. I preferred to fill a gap, which was medicines for people that didn't have medicine yet. So then when I studied, that made my school career easier because I knew which topics that I had to focus on, and I also could select very specifically bachelor and masters that trained me to become a biomedical scientist. So I think that helped, that I knew what I wanted to be. My PhD project was not that well planned, so I always thought that I wanted to focus on immunology. But then I did one internship in genetics, and I realized that I liked that a lot, and actually more than an internship in immunology that I also did. So when I had my master's degree, there was an opportunity to do a PhD project with the department that I did my genetics internship. So I went there, and then I had a project. It was on Duchenne. And the first year, that project went nowhere. So after 1 year, nothing worked, everything failed. The vector that I had to use didn't work. And after a year, so in the Netherlands, after 4 years, you need to have at least 4 publications. So if something doesn't work out, you have a problem. So then after 1 year, together with my PI, we decided we have to change. Let's start a side project. And that side project was exon skipping. So whenever your PI proposes a side project, don't be too worried. You can make a career out of your side project. So the side project worked quite well. So after 3 years, I had 5 papers, and I could finish my thesis on time, despite not doing anything productive in the first year. So then when I was done with my PhD, I had always planned to go abroad, but at that time they started the first clinical trial with exon skipping, and they offered me to stay there as a postdoc. And then I had a strategic decision where I thought, how often will you be able to be involved in a clinical trial of a therapy that you helped develop? And how often can you go abroad? You can always go abroad. So I stayed, and I was there as a postdoc when they did the clinical trial. Of course, I'm a mouse doctor. I didn't do the clinical trial myself, but I was there, and I could see what was happening. So that was quite exciting and a really good learning experience. Then after the clinical trial, the PI of the group, so my previous PhD supervisor, left to work for the company that we were collaborating with. So then the group lost its leader, and well, I more or less hoped that I could be the leader, but the head of the department said, no, we'll recruit someone new. You're too young, you're too inexperienced. So then after half a year, no one new was recruited. There was no vacancy. I thought, I can at least try to apply, I thought, but that wasn't there. And at that point, I had basically taken over the group, and done all the work that the PI should have done. So then I went to the head of the department. So this was a meeting where I planned well. So I told him I'm doing all these things that the PI should do. So I want to know now, will you hire someone to do this work? Because then I go somewhere else. Or will you instead say, well, if you're doing the work, you can keep doing it, but then I want the recognition. I don't want to be a postdoc when I'm doing an assistant professor's work. And well, the head of the department then said, okay, well, I don't think anyone else would be able to do this better than you are doing it. So then I became the group leader. From there, I worked myself up from assistant professor to associate professor to full professor. So I think in a nutshell, that is my story. And if you have questions later, then of course we can go into them. But I think it's now nice if Shalini also briefly outlines her career path.
So, at last, after the technical challenges, we managed to get there. But so you could say that looking back, it looks like it was sort of a clear line on thinking, but actually it was very unplanned, my whole career. And so you could say that, to just give you some background, I originally come from Zanzibar. So those of you who do not know where that is, you can go to the maps and have a look. It's a small island outside of Tanzania on the east coast of Africa. So that was sort of the starting point. I had a lot of very good role models in our family, with a lot of women who were very highly educated. So that was a clear driver that you need to get educated. And chemistry was always an area which was fascinating for me. And on top of that, and I think this is really important, that we tend to forget, that I had really good chemistry teachers in school. So that helps actually keep your interest and really strengthen your interest in that. So I did my master's in chemistry and also my PhD in chemistry, and all of that in Sweden. And that was during in the area of organic and analytical chemistry. So it was broader. And at that point in time was when you were starting to question chiral molecules as drugs. You might recall there was this big scandal around thalidomide and other things. So that the whole area of chirality in drugs was quite fascinating and big at that time. And I did my PhD in that area. So from there, I also then did a postdoc in Germany and went back to Linköping, which is in the middle of Sweden, at the university there, and started my academic career. So that was my plan, that I would actually do an academic career. And during that time in academia, I actually also gave birth to 2 children, which was really nice as well, because you could sort of organize your work a bit more freer in academia compared to industry, you could say. And I was also offered a research position. At that time, there was a lot of support from the government of Sweden, wanting to try to really support women as researchers and try to get more women into professorships and things like that. So that was a good time in a way for being a young woman who was starting a career in academia in a way, because you got a lot of support economically and otherwise. But you could say that I moved on, and we can come back to that, I think, later on. From academia, I moved on to industry after a few years in academia, and I reached a position of associate professor. I had to make a decision to remain in academia or to move to industry, and I decided to move to industry. So then me and my family, we all moved to Gothenburg, which is on the west coast of Sweden. And I started my first position in chiral aspects of drug molecules, because that was what I was actually done my research and PhD. And from there on, you could say that I moved on to other positions. So you started to look at, okay, I want to actually make a difference to patients, and how can I be part of developing a drug and discovering a drug? So I started to work at medicinal chemist and in medicinal chemistry department. So I started as a team leader, moved on to associate director, senior director, and so forth. But I also always followed science, because I'm pretty passionate about that. And I like to try out new things, so I'm not afraid. So I was asked whether what would I see as the next step, and I thought, okay, as a medicinal chemist, you discover and develop drugs, and then they go into man, and then you never see them again. They are sort of off your table, because you've done your job of designing the molecule and making that molecule work in man. So I wanted to actually follow the whole thing to man and patients and through the clinical trials. So then I actually was offered the fantastic opportunity of heading a department of drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics. And that department actually is part of discovering and developing the drug, but then follows the drug through the clinical trials and to the market. So that for me was a real development opportunity, and that's been a fantastic journey. I was ahead of DMPK for 7 years, so I learned a lot, but I could also bring to the table a lot. And whilst I was head of DMPK, I was then asked by my boss whether I would be interested in to enter the field of oligonucleotide therapeutics. So we had started a collaboration with Moderna in the early 2000s, where we're looking at mRNA as a therapeutic, and nobody of us actually knew much about it. So everybody in AstraZeneca, in a way, was, yeah, we knew what RNA biology was, and we knew some of the chemistry of it, but you don't really know anything about what makes it a therapeutic. And that's a big difference. So we were working together with a company called Moderna Therapeutics. You might have heard in the news, they're involved in COVID-19 vaccine development, and they're going to enter phase 3, I heard today. So that we work with them, or are still working with them, and so that was the journey of oligonucleotides. And after a couple of years, then we set up a collaboration with Ionis Therapeutics, and then I sort of added on that bit as well to my knowledge, and started to work with Ionis to develop antisense oligonucleotide therapeutics. And this year we have set up a collaboration with Silence Therapeutics, and I'm working now with them on siRNA as therapeutics. So it's sort of just not being so scared of trying out new things is what I think is really important as well. And it's a little bit about what you do and try to do. You might not always succeed, but I think it's important to try. That's my story.
Okay, thank you very much. You both hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. That interesting introduction. A lot of things I didn't know about both of you. Shall we move on to some questions? So there is a bit of fun interest. So particular question number 4, what are the main differences between the research conducted at a company and the one in an academic center? And I think maybe if you both answer that, because I know, Annemieke, you have a lot of experience with, collaborations with industry as well.
Yeah.
So maybe we should start with you.
Yeah, so I think so from the collaborations that I've done, what I see is that as a scientist in academia, often you're curiosity driven. So you want to study also how things go. And if you have an interesting result, or a therapy doesn't really work as well as it's supposed to be, sometimes it's really interesting to say, well, as a side project, we'll discover why that is. We'll see how that exactly works. Within industry, you have less freedom in that regard because you're much more goal-driven. You want to develop a therapy, for instance. If that therapy doesn't work, well, it doesn't really matter that much why it doesn't work. That's for the academics to figure out. You then focus to something else. So I think that's so the main difference is that there's more curiosity-driven research happening at academia, and also say the more early on risky projects generally take place at academia. But it's definitely not black and white. I've also collaborated with people in industry where they did also look more into the background and the pathology and the say the more scientific part of it. And of course, sometimes as academics, we also do say the more boring stuff that we usually let the industry do, which is the PK/PD studies and the toxicity studies. Usually those are the things done at industry that you have to do to develop a drug. But then sometimes as an academic, you have to do part of it as well. So it's definitely not black and white, but I would say more curiosity driven versus more goal driven.
I think that sort of is a good path to go, but I also think it's different in different companies. Some companies are more science driven than others, and it also depends if you're a small biotech or you're a big pharma. Biotech has a limited amount of funds, so they are really very focused on what they need to deliver because they have investors who are wanting to get some return of investment from the investment they've done. In big pharma, you have a bit more freedom in that you have more resources and you have more muscle, you could say. So you can drive your curiosity and you can do it in a different way, because especially, for example, if I look at AstraZeneca, we are what you call, we see ourselves as very scientifically focused and scientifically driven. So we are data-driven company. You do not make decisions based on I believe, I think. You do decisions on hard data that you have generated experimentally, either in clinical setting or in animals or cells or wherever. So that's very important for us in our culture, that we are data-driven. But we also like to be driven by curiosity and try to understand stuff that might not be our core of what we're doing, but we still think it's really important that you can do some side projects that could actually deliver something really science-breaking, because it's just something by serendipity. Sometimes it's quite important to allow you to do that as well. So what we have is also a huge amount of postdocs that we hire and recruit every year. So we are around 120 postdocs every year that are in our research, in our labs. We also have a huge amount of graduate students as well, and then we have students who are doing their master thesis. So by working through students and postdocs and graduates, we use a lot of that science and experimental curiosity to work with that. And then the way it works in AstraZeneca is that you always have to have an academic collaborator for the postdocs. So you work with academia to drive some of the science that is maybe not mainstream, but it's really important, or I as a scientist think it's incredibly interesting. And I can't do it in my daily job, but I can do it on the side with the postdoc, for example. So I think it depends very much on the company as well. So I think that's important to look at. But I think what I enjoy very much is our core, and that is really to develop medicines for patients where you don't have any medicines, to see some of the really sick people in kidney diseases where they have absolutely no treatment today. It's heartbreaking. And so if you could really do something about that, then you would feel really that you have achieved something of great value. And I don't mean just the dollars. I mean, a lot of us researchers are not driven by that. We don't go to work full of energy, wanting to do a lot of research. We do that mainly because you're seeing the patient and that what impact you would have on lives and quality of life of people. So I think it's a bit different, but it depends on what you want and what you enjoy.
Okay. Shall we move on? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. Can we move on a little bit to question number 3 then? Could you describe a typical day or maybe week in terms of what kind of tasks you perform in industry to paint a better picture? Again, that's mainly more for Shalini, but maybe there's some sort of similar questions for Annemieke, I think. So if you start, Shalini.
So it depends on what level you're in. So if I'm a bench scientist, I've just recruited a person who's done a postdoc. A lot of the time is spent in the labs. I mean, as I said, we are a very data-focused company. So you will be working in a team of scientists, and this is the strength of what I enjoy really a lot in the pharmaceutical industry, is that when you're trying to solve a very difficult problem, trying to develop a drug that's never been developed, making a molecule that's never been made before, making it, giving it properties that are not so easy to give a molecule. So you then sit with a group of experts who have all done PhDs or are masters in some topic or some subject matter. And so you have chemists, biologists, pharmacologists, bioanalytical chemists, pharmaceutical scientists, etc., who are doing formulations and so forth. So you have a cross-functional team, all with experts who are good at their own field, and you have a common goal. So you sort of trying to putting all of your knowledge together to solve a problem. And that for me is really giving a lot of energy for most people. It's the most fun piece of work that you do. And so most of us in the pharma industry are involved in that. It's your core business to drive drug projects, identify drug targets, biomarkers, molecules, do experiments in cells, animals, etc. That's really fascinating. So that for me is what you do every day. Then in some cases, like myself, who is more steering and just making strategic decisions and so forth, I don't work in the lab anymore, but I enjoy seeing what comes out of the lab. So that's my job, to make sure that the labs have what they need. The labs have the people they need, the competence that we need, the instrumentation we need, everything else we need, and academic collaborations, because actually not all the smart people in the world are either in academia or in industry. They are everywhere. So you need to work with academia as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Alini. I think perhaps you could elaborate a little bit. I think people might want to know more about how much time for like a typical bench scientist is spent in the lab. How much admin do they do? I know that in academia, sometimes postdocs do a lot of admin as well already. So maybe we could have a little view from Shalini, how that's in industry, and from Annemieke, what you feel like it's in academia.
So I would say that it depends as well here with your role. So if you're a research scientist or a senior research scientist, you would be spending like 60-70% of your time generating data, but also analyzing your data and being able to present the data to the project team that you're working in, so that every other function that is there understands what the data means and what does that how does that impact your project? So I think it's both being able to generate the data, but to analyze the data and be able to present the conclusions from it. So you do that on a daily basis or a weekly basis where you have project meetings. So you generate, you are sort of in that phase. But as you have broader responsibilities, when you're working with several projects or you're leading a team, then of course the admin part will increase then, right?
Yeah, but that's the same in academia, I think. So the higher you go, the more it's your job to actually avoid the red tape for all the other people, so that they can do their work and that you deal with most of the admin. I think in at least in our group, I mean, yeah, there's always admin involved. I mean, if you want to do a study in mouse, you need to write a form. If you want to use iPS cells, you will need to write a form, but that doesn't really matter whether you work in academia or in industry. These regulations you just have to comply with. I think so. The difference is that, of course, usually if you work in academia, the teaching will be part of your work. And that is training people, which happens in industry as well, but also lectures. And I know that AstraZeneca also, they give lectures as well, but for them it's, of course, it's not mandatory. While if you're a professor, you have to teach. So that is much more part of your job, and not always at a voluntary basis. But I think for the reporting and the administration and things like that, that's just, I mean, it's legislation, and it applies as much to industry as to academia.
Okay, so there was a lot of interest in some more of the career development oriented questions, so maybe we can quickly jump to that. What are the differences in the steps to follow in order to achieve a permanent established position as a researcher in academia and industry? And do you have any recommendations of how to complement one's academic education to increase one's attractiveness to industry? Whether it would be useful to pursue additional education, for example, GLP, GMP regulations or comparable guidelines, which are typically not relevant to academia. So I think maybe if we start with Shalini here.
So I don't think one can in general say that GMP, GLP is going to make it, those courses are going to make you more attractive. I think it all depends on what you are interested in. I think, I believe that if you have really good understanding and knowledge of the science you have graduated in, and maybe also added some experience from some industrial experience of doing your master thesis or graduates or doing a postdoc in an academic lab or industrial labs. I think it's the depth of the science that makes you more attractive rather than a lot of other periphery, as I see it. Don't get me wrong. It is important to know that if your job requires it. So, and if your job requires it, then either you need to take it or you will be given that training in your job. So not all of us start coming from academia knowing GMP, GLP at the level actually the industry asks you to have. So I would say we'll have some idea about it, but not the hands-on understanding. So I don't think that is really critical. It could add to it, but I have actually never hired anybody because of that, if I should say so.
And then I think, so of course, it's difficult to get a permanent position in academia. And that is because most of us work with grants, and the grants last for X years, and you can't hire someone permanently just assuming that you will get a new grant. So that makes getting a permanent position in academia, it makes it more difficult. But I also have an example. So we were collaborating a lot with Prosenza, and later they were acquired by BioMarin. And a lot of the technicians from our department and from LUMC, they went to BioMarin because there, after 1 year, you would get a permanent position, and they thought they were golden. Well, then BioMarin stopped developing exon skipping for DMD, and they fired 80+% of the people. So that's how much a permanent position is worth. I mean, they got a good benefit deal at the end, but still they lost their job. So don't misjudge how permanent the permanent position is, because if a company stops developing a certain work, you may just be laid off. So that's probably good to bear in mind, that there's no guarantee anywhere, unfortunately.
No, and I think the whole industry and academia as well, I think that has changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years. I think where before your grandparents or your parents even joined a company or a university and were there for life, that's not the case today. We move jobs. We are forced to move jobs, and we choose to move jobs. So it's a more fluent or more fluidic career and companies or positions that you go for today. So I think that's changed quite a bit. And it's as Annemieke says, having an industrial job doesn't mean that you sort of have a guaranteed job anymore.
Okay, shall we move on to the next question then? I'm afraid it's for Shalini again. Number 11, if someone has spent part of her career in academia, can she move to industry? Actually, I think that's probably for both of you. There's an addendum from a different person. I have understood from others that it is difficult for people who have been working in academia for a longer period of time to get a job in industry. I'm not entirely sure, but this might be referring to postdocs that have moved up into professorships, because I understand that it's sometimes professors are headhunted to join particular companies. Yeah.
So I think it's, I don't think it's black and white. It all depends on your expertise in academia. So we have recruited academics, and the latest recruitment at a pretty high level is actually the head of respiratory and immunology. Maria Belvisi is a professor at Imperial College. So she just moved into industry setting, been doing her whole career in academia before that. And even at lower positions, you could say that we have expert knowledge, people with expert knowledge in different diseases, people with expert knowledge in actually medicinal chemistry that you have from academia, because academics are actually very, very much also working together with industry. So they have a lot of knowledge that they build up by working together with industry. And we have a number of those ourselves, where we work with professors in MedChem at Max Planck University in Dresden, for example. And those people or those academics actually would have a great possibility to join industry, because the knowledge and the understanding and the expertise is what you're going for. So I don't think one can say you can't go either way. I have seen both examples, people from industry also, because they have been collaborating heavily with academia, have built up that affiliation with academic institutions, so they teach at those universities on a part-time basis whilst they are working in the company, and they can move to academia when and if there is a position. And sometimes actually academia wants industrial experiences.
Yeah. So I can just second that. I think there's a misconception that once you've chosen for industry, you can never go back, or once you're at a certain point in your academic career that you cannot go to industry, and that's not the case. You can move in between both. So it's not that if you make a decision now, if you're in the, say, early postdoc or mid postdoc, if you make a decision now, that is not the permanent position. You can move later, and also if you go to industry, you can go back to academia, and vice versa. So I think that's probably a bit reassuring, where people think it's really black and white. Once you go to industry, you can't go back, but that's not the case.
I think what is important if you do go for industry, for example, if you start working, is that you need to make sure that you are keeping your scientific literature publishing up, because actually that is really a requirement in academia. So if you are joining a company which does not want you to publish and things like that, then you have a problem.
Yeah.
But if you are joining a company that is very keen on publishing and actually promoting that, like we do, for example, in AstraZeneca, then it's much easier to go over to academia or do that as a part-time thing here, which quite a few of our people, actually scientists, are doing. They're affiliated and they get to spend 20-25% of the time in academia, teaching and doing research.
But I think it's also important, if you choose if you want to work for a company, that you choose which company you're going to work for, that you choose it wisely. Because, I mean, your career will not be measured by whether you publish or not, but still, do you want to work for a company that doesn't want to publish their results, that doesn't want to share their achievements, that doesn't want to move the scientific field forward? Do you want to work there as a scientist? I think that's something that you have to ask yourself. And then if you go for the companies that are more science driven and more data driven, usually those companies will publish. So then you don't have this gap in your CV that you otherwise might have.
Thank you both. That answered quite a few of the questions we had on the list, but maybe we could quickly answer one of the audience questions that come out. Moving from industry to academia is not too difficult, because when you're out of the system, it's difficult and all the requires.
I think that's what we both
answered
that. I mean, if you plan to go to industry and never go back, it doesn't really matter. But if you think, well, maybe in the future I do want to go back, then make sure that you choose a company that does publish. But also, I mean, if you want to become a scientist because you have a certain, there was also a question about character traits. Just being a scientist, you need to have certain character traits, and that's probably not different from industry or academia.
Yeah.
We're scientists. We want to discover things, to move the field forward. So then for me, it would be really strange if I would work for a company that does not allow me to share the science, to move the field forward by sharing the data. And of course, you're not going to give your competitor an advantage if you can avoid it. But still, at some point, I mean, if you do a clinical trial, you have the moral obligation to share the results and to publish the results. So I think that's probably also important. Which company do you choose? And I think, I mean, if you're very curiosity driven and you really like the fundamental science, then a career in industry is probably less suitable.
I think we probably also work in a field where there's a few companies who publish quite a lot of stuff.
We do, yeah. And I think that's so we have Stan Crook to thank for that when Ionis, or well, back then it was called ISIS, when they established that, they said, well, we have a new field, and the only way we can really develop it and move it forward is to share the data, to share the findings, be they good or bad. And they really set the standard in that way, and I think that's good. And you can see that others who are joining the field are doing it as well. And I think it's a very good example, and probably also why the field has moved as quickly as it has. Because there was the hype, and then of course we couldn't in 5 years have therapies for everything with antisense oligonucleotides. If you see the number of clinical trials that are now occurring, the speed with which new drugs are now being approved, I think, we have to thank for that the field is quite open, and that both the companies and the academics are data driven and share the results and use that to move the field forward, and also collaborate a lot with each other. I think I've not seen a field where companies and academics collaborate as much as this
I
one.
think it's a very open atmosphere, and people try to help, especially like us coming into the field recently, looking at the history of oligos and so forth. It's been people have been extremely helpful and open in their advice, and also to share what they know and things like that. So I think that's really a bit of an unusual area, so to speak, when it comes to research. That's a very positive part.
It's a very new field. So what is nice is that you can actually meet the people that discovered the phosphorothioate modification. You can meet these people, and they are still alive. And I think that with many other fields, you don't have that. I think. And maybe just briefly go back to Alex, because Alex has a question about if you go back from industry to academia, then you don't have grants and PhD supervisions. Yeah, but you do have industry skills. That's also quite valuable for academia. So of course I understand that if you work for 10 years with a company, that you may have supervised less PhD students. You didn't need to apply for grants, but still you have the industry experience, which makes you really valuable. So I mean, it's definitely not the case that once you go one direction, you can never go back. If you're happy in industry, if you're happy in academia, I mean, stay there. I'm not saying that everyone should switch all the time, but don't think that if you make a switch once that you can never go back.
I think there's a question from Sunil here about what the value does it. Okay. Well, so hang on. So guys, I'm not saying that we're only focusing on publications. We are focusing on making drugs and delivering them to patients. That's our focus, number one. But we are also science driven, and we also would like to share our experiences and our knowledge, and so we publish. Yeah. Now, if you have a low publication record, but you have gained a lot of business knowledge and manufacturing, well, there's a whole bunch of careers in that area as well, and not necessarily in all areas, because we have the legal area, we have operations, which is really manufacturing of drugs. Of course, we are not going to ask people there to publish. That's not the core of that business. I mean, a lot of the publishing is done by researchers in early discovery and those working in clinical trials, right? So that's where you have a lot of the researchers with the focus on generating data, scientific data that is of relevance to drive the science forward, and they publish. If you're in manufacturing, you could be publishing processes, or you could be publishing other things in there, important engineering aspects of manufacturing, because that is really a high-tech end of it. But that's a different kind of publication. There's a lot of more patents and things like that. And if you want to publish and it's relevant, yeah, I'm absolutely sure you would be supported to do that. But that's not the driver for why you get the job. So if you have that experience and you're wanting to continue in that area, by all means, that's the publication list is not going to be the rule of thumb to choose people from. It's actually your knowledge and your experience that is your basis, right? And then everything else is a topping of a cream and strawberries, so to speak, if you look at the cake. So you need to have the foundation, and the foundation is the experience and knowledge.
Okay, so I think we're moving into more specialized questions, and we have here one question that several people have upvoted from Tomasz. At what stage in your academic career should you commit to a research topic? Is it advisable to do a postdocs in different fields, or rather focus on one goal? I think that's probably one for Annemieke.
Yeah, so I think it also depends on the situation. I think what's important that if you want to pursue a scientific career in academia, so you want to become a group leader, you need to find your niche. So if you are in a topic where you think, well, I did my PhD on this, but I mean, it's not my favorite field. I see new developments. I find that much cooler. I mean, by all means, go there, because you need to have passion for your topic, because you will work a lot on this topic. So I think that's the one thing. You need to really like your topic. And if you haven't found something that you really like and are really passionate about, then you need to keep looking. Then the second thing is that you need to also have the opportunity to set up your own research group. So for me, it was easy because my PI left. So I got vacuumed up, and I had no competitors within the department who did the same work. But now for the people in my group that are developing and want to become independent, they need to have their own niche. I mean, they can't also work on exon skipping for Duchenne. I mean, I work on that, and if they work on it, they will be in my shadow, and they will not become good independent researchers. So then they have two options: either they go somewhere else to work on DMD exon skipping, where they are by themselves and the main person there, or they find a niche. They say, well, okay, I will work on biomarkers, or I will work on exon skipping for another disease, or I will work on, say, the brain pathology of Duchenne. And if they find their niche, then they can still make use of the expertise and the network that I have, but still have their own independent line of research. So I think that is important, that if you want to stay in your field, if you go somewhere where no one else is working on that will work out. But if you're somewhere under the wing of someone else who is in exactly the same field, that might be difficult. I mean, find your niche would be my recommendation.
Would you like to add something, Shalini, or?
No, I totally agree with Annemieke. You need to find something you are passionate about, because it's going to be a lot of ups and downs. It's just not, you will have a lot of disappointments. And so to be able to keep up the energy and the drive and really your interest and to move your career, you need to be passionate about your topic. I would say you need to do that. That passion has to be in industry as well if you really want to succeed. It's all around being really wanting to do beyond what you would do if you were sort of lukewarm about. It's not just a job.
Yeah.
At least not for me.
No, I mean that, and I think it's also very good to be aware that everyone started with their first publication. I mean, they were all there for everyone. There was a point where they had no publication. So everyone started with their first application. And with grant applications, with publications, you get no more often than yes. So don't be too disappointed by that. So one of our PhD students got his paper, it needed a revision, and he was a bit disappointed. Actually, I mean, it's very doable. It was first paper, very doable. I thought, well, this is good. But then he said, yeah, but I wanted it accepted immediately. Well, that happened to me once. You can look up how many publications I have. It happened to me once that it was accepted without revisions. So just be aware that this is the name of the game. And I think, I mean, whether you work in industry or in academia, I mean, if you submit papers, you will need at least one revision, usually multiple. And in academia, you apply for grants and you get a yes or often a no. But within industry, it's the same thing. Also, if you want to do something, you have to fight for your money. And sometimes they will tell you no.
Well, the best thing I think for me was when I moved from academia to industry, the one thing I don't miss in academia, Annemieke, is the grant process.
I can imagine, yeah.
that is sort of a time-consuming. But on the other hand, as Annemieke said, it doesn't come for free in industry either. You have to really motivate why you should get that X amount of money to do whatever experiments you want to do on the side, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, so this is also sometimes a misconception with academics that industry has limitless funding.
Oh yeah.
That's not the case.
No.
Okay, I think we've come back a little bit more to the difference between industry and academia, and I think one of the questions that's been upvoted a bit is it easier to balance your professional and personal life in industry? Shall we start with Annemieke? How difficult is it in academia?
I think so. The good thing about academia is that you have a lot of flexibility. So you decide the topic that you work on, and I mean, if you can't find money for it, then you can't do it. But no one will ever tell you to do research on something that you don't want to do research on. I mean, it's up to you. So you have this flexibility, and generally also your working hours are flexible. I mean, you make a lot of hours, but if you want to start early and leave early, that's possible. If you want to work in the weekend rather than during the week, there's a lot of flexibility in academia, and I think that helps. I think the work-life balance. Well, I traveled a lot, so I used to, I think, probably travel 3 to 4 times per month before the COVID-19 situation, and my husband would complain that I was not there during the week or that I wasn't there during the weekend. Well, now I'm home all the time, and now he's complaining that he doesn't have enough self-time. But I think mainly as an academic, there are some things that we need to do. I mean, we have grant deadlines, we need to apply, we have teaching, we need to do this. But a lot of the work that we do is also self-imposed. And a lot of the stress is also self-imposed. I mean, why are we so busy? Because he didn't say no to more things. So I think it's also, a lot of it is also how you manage it. What helps if you have good organizational skills. And I think that will help. But with industry, people can tell you need to do this now. And with academia, that happens less often.
I can only agree with it. You have more, it's a more structured way of doing research, you could say, because you are driving a drug project, and there's decision points where you're asking for a lot of money from the management, for example, when you enter, you want to do a large study in pigs or non-human primates. It's going to cost a lot of money. So then you have a deadline to deliver that, and you will make decisions on that, and you want to go into man, and that's going to cost a lot more. So all of that, of course, you have a project plan that you have to try to keep to. So in some cases, it means for shorter periods of time, you will have a totally different workload compared to normal times. But it is also very, it's emphasized, and it is something that we try to really help, especially younger, new people coming in, to not get too absorbed and really find that work-life balance, because it is important if you're going to be sustainable to really be able to think the best of your thinking, to really deliver the best of the science, and to really be able to contribute as good as you can. Then you really need to have the life-work balance somewhat, right? Because otherwise you're going to burn out.
Yeah,
it is important.
Yeah. A good manager, be it in academia or in industry, a good manager will look after the people in their group and will try to avoid that they burn themselves out. And I think both in academia and industry, usually people are very passionate about their work. Yeah. So I have way more often that I have to stop people and to tell them to take a break and to go on holiday than cases where I have to tell people that they need to pick up their pace. That happens a lot less frequently.
I can only agree with that, because I think a lot of the people we have, and it's you also need to think about what phase in life you are. So when you have young children and then a career that's moving and things like that, it is really important that you do find time and ways to balance. Now, whilst we can not decide to work like Annemieke, maybe that she goes to the lab at 3 a.m. in academia, we do have flexible work hours. So you can work anytime between 7 and 7. And so depending on your life situation, a lot of young parents, for example, working in the labs in Sweden, for example, where I am working quite a lot, is they are in the labs at 7 a.m. because they want to end their day at 3 and go be the rest of the afternoon, evening with the kids and taking them to sporting events and whatnot. And that's fine.
But I think wherever you go, there's good situations and there's bad situations. So if you consider going anywhere, it's always good to talk to the people that work there and see what they like, whether they like it or not. I mean, you will easily see if they all look extremely stressed and very tired, maybe reconsider. Because a good employer will, I mean, happy people are more productive and deliver more quality. But some people don't realize this. So try to investigate. I mean, it's not just about the name of the company or being in industry or being in a certain group. Try to see how things work. How are you supervised? What conditions are there if you want to work less, or just investigate this before you go somewhere.
I think I would add to that perhaps as well that it's not just the lab or the company, but also the country you're in, because a lot of the background support, like childcare also, is very dependent on which country you live in. So let's quickly go to some other questions before we have to finish. So, Annemieke, what gives you energy at work in academia and what causes you stress?
I think, well, the most energy, and Shalini already said it, it's the patients. I mean, in the end, we do it for the patients. We work for the patients, and going to a patient meeting and seeing the patient, seeing the parents, I mean, that will give me energy and motivation for weeks, if not longer. And I think also the group member. So I'm very privileged because the people in my group, they're very motivated. And it's really nice to see how they all have their different talents and to help them develop those talents. So I think that gives me a lot of energy as well. I like that the work has a lot of variation. So you teach, you write papers, or you help other people write papers, you think about projects, you plan things, you travel the world, you meet different people and learn different things. I think it's learning every day. I think that's also one of the things that I really like. And what gives me stress is, so I'm an extremely organized person. So what I really don't like is if there's, due to someone else's lack of planning, suddenly I have to work in the weekend or in the evening, just because there is a deadline and someone, thought that if the deadline is Monday morning and they submit it to me Friday 5 p.m. So my best New Year's resolution ever was 2014, where I thought I'm just going to stop facilitating this. So if people are too late, I mean, I'm not going to work in the weekend or the evening just because their lack of planning. Fortunately, I'm of course now in a position where I can do this. But it's not only my group members that I do this to. I mean, the head of the department also knows that he doesn't have to try this with me because I just flat out refuse.
I think we have someone confirming that, and I can confirm that from my end too. That is the biggest frustration I have when I have to rely on other people and they don't do their job.
Yeah.
So, same question for you, Shalini.
Yeah, so what gives me energy is what Annemieke already alluded to, is that it really being there, doing what we are doing, really trying to develop drugs that meet the patient's needs, and especially for those patients who do not have any treatment today. That is a big driver and gives a lot of energy. So you don't really feel, I mean, I never felt I don't want to go to work. There's always things that are cooking that I want to pursue and drive. The other bit that gives me energy is people, and I like to develop people. And I'm really happy to see people develop, or people who didn't think they could become, for example, a team leader, or they couldn't become a project leader or things like that. And by coaching them, mentoring them, you can actually move the bar. And I think that's really great to see when I'm part of doing that, because a lot of that is done actually by the individual. I'm not doing it. I'm just trying to facilitate it. But that gives a lot of energy as well, to see that you can actually get people to do things they never believed they could do. The other bit that gives me energy is, of course, the curiosity and being able to do all the different things I've been fortunate enough to be given the chance to do in AstraZeneca, for example. There's a lot of focus on talent and development of individuals at all levels. So it doesn't mean that it's only in certain positions that you get to develop, but really focus on trying to develop individuals at the level they are. But that means that you do get opportunities, and I think that is also something that gives me energy, that I can maybe do quite a lot of different things.
Well, thank you. I think it kind of brings us right to another question. Do you think there are any characteristic traits that are more suitable, make you more suitable for academia or industry? Or are there any sort of traits that you think do well in academia and industry?
It depends on the company you are in, but if we're thinking about pharmaceutical industry, I think the passion for science, or passion for manufacturing, or passion for what you're doing is the important thing, and I don't think it's any different in academia.
Exactly. No. I think the only thing, so if you're a fundamental scientist, like I said already, if you're a fundamental scientist, you just want to discover new things, you want to discover how something works, then there's often less place for that in industry. But even there, you might be able to find, I mean, if you want the crystal structures of things, then probably you can find a place in industry. But I think, it's what the character traits that make you a good scientist apply to both pharmaceutical industry and academia.
So I would say today that you're doing basic science in also quite a lot in the industry, because you need to, it gives you an edge. So I think that is that, but I think the important thing is to do what you really believe in and are passionate about. I think then whether you're doing it in industrial setting or academia, it's a matter of choice.
Okay, maybe two quick questions for Shalini. Is it true that in industry getting promoted is easier? What do you think?
No. Well, it depends on industry. So let's be clear. So if you have a hierarchical organization, then probably yes, because then you have a lot of steps put in there so that you can actually develop and move. But if you have a flat organization, for example, like the organization AstraZeneca has, which is that from the bench scientist to the CEO, there are only 7 levels in between. And so that means that you have the opportunity to grow in role, and there's a seniority. So there's a scientific ladder and there's a line, and you both are valued, highly valued equally. salary bonus or blah, 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 all of that. We have the same career levels, only you're going different focuses. And a person like me who can't make up her mind, I've done both. So at the moment, I was a line manager for quite a long time, but I was very interested in science. I had a lot of collaborations on the side. And then I moved into chief scientist role for new modalities. And now, since April, I'm chief scientist and heading oligo discovery in AstraZeneca, trying to build our oligonucleotide discovery organization. So it depends. So I don't think it's more easy to you could say it's more positions maybe in a hierarchical organization, and therefore you would feel you're moving in your career. But I think you have in academia also several levels, and I don't know, Annemike, you want to answer that one?
Sorry, I was answering other questions in chat.
Okay, so I was just thinking, I mean, you have academic careers, but where you don't have maybe that many levels, but I don't know, it depends on the industry you're in, because in AstraZeneca, there are not that many levels, so you will not move so quickly.
Yeah, so in academia, I mean, it's a postdoc, assistant professor, associate professor, and professor. I mean, those are the levels. I know, I mean, there's companies where you have a zillion positions, like like Ionis, for instance, where they have president and senior vice president and vice president of this. And I mean, at some point, and I know that Procenta had this as well, where they invented new positions for whoever they applied. I think, yeah, it's not. I don't think it really adds much. I think and also don't rate yourself by what position you're in. Are you happy with the job you're in? I think that's the
content, I think, is more important than what it is called.
Yes.
And it will be different in different companies. So I think it is important to look at what is the content of the job. It can have a very fancy title, but not necessarily an interesting job.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, then one quick question. Can one be overqualified for certain positions? If so, how do you deal with that? I'm not sure you can be, but...
Well, I think, what we sometimes have is that we have a technician position and that a postdoc will apply. But I think if that person is really passionate and can explain why they apply, I think what we want is passionate people that are qualified. And if you're overqualified, the only worry would be that people would get bored with what they're doing. And then, yeah, so sometimes I can make a project more challenging if I have an overqualified person, but sometimes I can't. And then that would be a worry. And that would be something that we can discuss with the person, how to deal with. And if sometimes that person, I mean, I've had also that where they say, well, yeah, I know it's not challenging, but I have 3 children at home. At the moment, I don't want challenging.
So I think that is very, very key as well, that you explain in that case why that is, that you want to go for a job that you're overqualified for. It could be that it is that at your life balance part is more important to you at this point in time in your life, and therefore you're not willing to take an over challenging job. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to explain that you are aware of it.
Yeah.
And this is the reasoning you have behind why you're applying for the job, which for on paper you definitely are overqualified.
Yeah, actually that is part of my personal experience, because when my daughter was a toddler, I was looking for a technician job because I didn't want full-time work. And I actually, thinking back, there was a bit of a problem of getting something like that. So, because people thought I was overqualified. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I think there was a few more questions. Would you say it's easier to move around in different roles rather than levels in a flat hierarchy company? And then I think we need to kind of think about finishing this up. Okay, Shalini, quick.
Yeah, so I think that's true. It is, and that's the big advantage from my perspective, in that if you're in a big company, for example, you can grow in your career level by actually really exploring other areas. So I've been was a senior director as head of department, but then I also was a senior director where I was the chief scientist, not chief scientist, I was then doing oligonucleotides with Ionis. I was not heading any department at the time. So you can switch over to other positions and grow in role, but at the same career level in a flat organization. And for me, that is more important, as I said before. The content of the job for me is more important than what the title is. So. But it's different. It depends on your drivers.
Quick question for Annemieke. In academia, sorry, find the question. Yes, how true is it that in academia you must be under the umbrella of a professor in order to get a chance to be promoted? I think you partially answered that.
I think I answered that already. I mean, if you're under the umbrella of a professor, so I wasn't, and that probably helped me because I could show my independence. But it also it depends on the way the system works. So in the Netherlands, you're in a department, you have your labs, and I mean, everything is there. So if you start your lab, everything is there already. Of course, in other places, you really have to start from scratch. You have to order everything yourself. And then, of course, it helps if you have a professor there to help you along. So it's probably situation dependent, but if you are under the umbrella of a professor, again, I'm going to repeat this, find your niche, find something that distinguishes you from that professor, so that it's not, oh yeah, but he or she is just the minion of that professor. No, that person is an expertise or an expert in that specific thing. Yes, they belong to that crowd, but they are a separate entity. I think that is important, because if they think you're part of someone's group and they don't see you as an independent researcher, and you then try to apply for grants, that might be difficult.
Okay, let's have one last question for Shalini specifically. Do you think in terms of relation between colleagues, is there more competition in industry or in academia?
No, I don't think, I don't see that there's competition between colleagues, because you are going to be judged depending on what you deliver and what you do.
Yeah, and again,
it depends on you and people you work with.
Yeah, and it's probably also, again, location dependent. So in our department, there's a really collaborative spirit, and if people would compete, I mean, that's not the atmosphere. People don't like that. I mean, we help each other, and we like to help each other, and I think so. It's okay to be a little bit competitive. But in the end, if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, you want to develop therapies for patients. So what you want to develop a therapy for the patients in the end. And it's not so much about your ego, whether you publish first or not. It's developing a therapy for the patients. And I think that's very important to keep that on your radar. And if you're in an environment where you feel that people's egos are more important than the patients, then maybe you're not in the right environment. I
think one of the values we have is really, I mean, putting patients first is one, but collaborativeness and sharing and being transparent is super important, a part of how we work and the culture we have. Yeah. So I don't even think about I'm competing with somebody. It's just not part of it, because it's a team who's going to deliver it.
Yeah.
And if you are not part of the team, then you will not deliver. Bottom line.
So I said last question, but I have one for you. Do you think that your sort of collaborative manner is that because you're women? Because that's
No.
often sort of touted that, you know, men are more sort of boss and women are more collaborative.
So our department has had male department heads all the time, and it's always been very collaborative. So I don't think it's gender specific.
No, I don't think I can say it's gender specific. So there's a more sometimes a more competitive aspect to between genders. You know, you could say there's some difference on that, but the culture actually then decides in the company how you're working. And actually we assess when we do this end of the year assessment, or when we continuously try to develop my people, for example, if a person is showing more of the uncollaborative attitudes, that is actually given feedback on quite immediately. Because that is a negative, that has a negative impact on our ability to deliver a drug and develop a drug. That's for sure. We need people to work together.
Okay, I think we've pretty much covered all the questions. I hope we answered all the questions for the audience. Thank you very much, Annemieke and Shalini, for doing this for us.
Thank you for hosting.
Yes, and my apologies for the technical.
You know, sometimes we have problems even when we tested things beforehand. It just happens. I think we've managed it finally, thank God. So, okay, I just would like to remind people that if people want to keep the OTS Journal Club going, then they need to volunteer to present data, because as of now, we do not have any future speakers. If you are a young scientist and you feel it's all a bit, you know, it's all only senior people that do these things, that's so not true. We encourage everyone from PhD students to Professor Emeritus to present any data they want to present. So please just email oligotherapeutics.org, hotpapers@oligotherapeutics.org for that. And as usual, the webinar has been recorded and will be made available. You just have to be a little bit patient. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks. Keep safe.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, keep safe. See you virtually.
You too.
OTS meeting.
Yes, definitely. Bye.
Bye.